All right, then, let's talk nature now with Angus Kennedy from Nature Northwest, who joins us on the line. Angus, good afternoon to you. How are you doing?
John, how are you doing? I'm doing very well.
Good, good. Well, it was another beautiful weekend, and I don't know whether it's to do with the time of the year or the fact that the weather is so nice, or maybe it's a combination, but the dawn chorus is as loud as I've ever heard it.
Yeah, the dawn chorus, it peaks at this time of year. There's International Dawn Chorus Day was Sunday just gone, when people all over this part of the world focus on the calls and what's going on. And the birds have been singing. Some of the birds have been singing since winter time. Some start in January, February, but it's been added to and added to and added to. And now is really the peak of their breeding season. It's when they're really marking out their territories. They're really trying to attract mates and let their presence be known. So we hear a huge amount of song. And
that's what it's all about. It's all about marking territory and attracting mates.
Yeah, it is. Yes, so there's a difference between... Yeah, a difference between the calls and the songs. So all birds have calls, and they call to each other all year round. That's how they communicate. They think that the small birds, and there's been a lot of studies on this, they have an average of about 15 different varieties of calls. So the little chaffinches and the blue tits and whatnot. Great tits have even more than that, over 20. They've huge variety of calls. But all of these different calls are for different things: to communicate to their mate, communicate to their chicks, or to communicate to each other in the winter time to warn of danger. There's a specific call for sparrowhawks, for instance, to help tell all the others around to duck and take cover. Mm-hmm. Whereas that's a little bit different to their song. Their song is purely for breeding, and it's the song that we're hearing mostly at the moment.
Right. And the loudest song signifies what the strongest and best fed males.
Yeah, that's it. So different species have very different kind of varieties of songs, and they use different kind of tactics depending on where they are. But they think that it's related to intelligence. The more variety that's in the tune, the more intelligent the song is. So, for instance, ravens, which just have their fairly dull kind of cawkish kind of call, but they have about 23 different types of sounds that they make, funny kind of clicks and gurgling sounds. And ravens, of course, are very intelligent birds as birds go. And the song thrush has its beautiful variety of notes, which it repeats and repeats and repeats. It's one that people know fairly well. And the song thrush is also a pretty intelligent bird. It uses tools. It uses what they call an anvil, or a rock, really, to crack open the snails that it hunts. And there's not many other birds that are able to do things like that. But the stronger the call, the stronger the song, and the chances are the healthier the bird is, because parasites, if a bird has a lot of parasites on it, that affects its testosterone levels. And if it affects the testosterone levels, it's the males that sing. So then the bird isn't going to be able to sing with such vigour and such variety. And the females pick this up and they think, that's no good. And they move along to find a different mate.
And what about the females? Do the females sing as well? Or do they call back?
Yeah, so there's so it's the males really that sing predominantly. There's a couple of exceptions to that, and the robin is one of those exceptions actually. The robin is one of the few birds that sings all year round, and both the males and the females sing. But it's still the males that are really pumping out their song to defend their territories at this time of year. So in general, no, the females don't sing. They have lots of chirps, they have lots of calls that they use to communicate, but they don't sing. They're listening. So for instance, the little willow warblers, which we talked about before, when they arrive, they are singing. They move along, and they sing. When they arrive from Africa to try and attract a mate. The females, meanwhile, are listening, and they're listening. And once they hear a song that they like, they'll make their presence known, and they'll effectively tell the male that, yeah, I'm here. Your song sounds good, and they'll check them out.
And once a male has attracted a female, then do they stop singing, or do they just sing less often?
Well, you'd think they'd stop singing. So, for instance, the likes of blackbirds now. Blackbirds have the same mate year on year. And they split up at the end of the summer, but then they come together again around about April time or so. So the blackbirds, the older blackbirds at least, they tend not to sing as much once they have established those bonds again. But they'll still sing in the morning time, and they'll still sing in the evening time. They're singing, proclaiming their territory rights. So for every bird that's singing out there, there's a couple of other birds that are sitting and listening, and they're listening to that song to see is it a bit weaker, or better again, has it disappeared? Is this an opportunity for them to be able to jump into that territory? But they think that the chicks learn the song off the males singing, and the chicks are able to hear the birds communicating them through the eggs, actually, which is quite incredible. But once they hatch out of that, they learn this song because they've reared chicks, different chaffinches and things like that, in captivity with other birds as parents or as foster parents, and even though they'll have a little bit of the chaffinch song, they tend to take on the other bird's song mostly. So they need to learn their song off the male. So that's one of the reasons they think that the male keeps singing. And that's so specific that birds have different accents in different places. If you go to the south of England and you're very familiar with our chaffinch song here in Donegal, you'll hear it'll be a little bit different, which is quite amazing, really, because birds are able to tell individuals just in a way that we can tell people's voices. We get to know people's voices well on the radio, or we get to know loved ones' voices very well, someone you mightn't heard of for a long time. If they answer the phone, you'll know immediately who it is. And it's the same kind of thing for the birds.
So as the season goes on, it's not necessarily a case of just lonely bachelors that you'll hear. It can be other birds as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The more persistent one as the season goes on is the lonely bachelors who haven't managed to find a mate, but the others are still defending their territory, and they're still telling everybody this is their spot. And they'll sing within their specific territory. They might fly and forage into other territories. They might share territories like that, but they won't sing in there. But it's their own little patch where their nest is where they'll sing. And they'll keep that going right up until kind of mid or even the end of June or so. And then different birds have their different tactics depending on where they are. So at the moment, if you are walking in any of our coastal areas, if you're lucky enough to have that within I think we can go 5k now, can't we?
Yeah.
Not just 2k. So if you can stretch out and get to the coast or get to the bog, there's not many places to shelter. There's not many hedgerows, not many woodlands there. So birds like the meadow pipits and particularly the skylark, what they do is they go high up into the air, and the skylark will stay up in the air singing for up to 4 minutes. It has the longest bird song of any bird in the world, and that's a tactic they use. Quite often they're really hard to see. It's good fun to try and see if you can spot the skylark. If you hear this little song repeating from high above you without stopping, that's the skylark. And see if you can see it, and oftentimes you won't be able to because they can go that high up.
And the dawn chorus starts pre-dawn, actually. And is it true that the birds that are singing earliest are those that eat worms? You know the old saying about the early bird catches the worm. Is that true?
Yeah, well, there is truth to that because, and what that's down to is the size of their eyes. The size of their eyes proportionately in their heads. So the thrushes, and the chats to an extent, but particularly the thrushes, so the song thrush, the mistle thrush, the blackbird, their eyes are very big. The robin's eyes are big as well. So as a result, they get the light first. They're triggered by the light, that pre-dawn light. And they like it when it's still, when there's not much wind. They've figured out that blackbirds stop singing once it gets to about 24 kilometres an hour, which is not terribly windy, really. So they just know that their song won't carry as far, so there's not much point. But at dawn, it's very cold, and anybody who's been up over the last few mornings, it's been beautiful weather, beautiful days. It gets quite hot in the afternoons, but in the morning time, it's still cold, and it stays cold for a couple of hours. And that blanket of cold air, it really helps the sound travel a huge distance. So they'll sing away, and the ones that are triggered by the light first are the first ones to sing. So yeah, you're right, and they tend to be the ones that eat the worms, so the robin, the blackbird. And then as the light increases a little bit, the wren will start to join in, and the chaffinches and all the other characters then as well. And also, an awful lot of these birds are feeding on bugs. And at that time of the day, early morning, it's still too cold for the bugs to be active. So it's a good activity for them to be doing, claiming their territory, reaffirming their bonds with their females before they go off foraging and looking for their hundreds of bugs every day.
Well, given that the weather was so good and the conditions just perfect, maybe that explains why they were so loud over the weekend. But anyhow, great time to be here. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a lovely time to be here. And there's, depending on where you are in Donegal, we've such variety up here in the northwest. That if you're out, say if you're up the top of Fanet, or if you are on Tory Island, or one of those beautiful places, you might be lucky enough to hear the corncrake. And the corncrake tends to sing all day and all night, but particularly at night time, because it's trying to attract birds that are migrating, females that are migrating. A lot of birds migrate at night. We talked of the whimbrel last week, and I heard one just last night actually. They tend to move around at night, and the corncrake then will call in that still night air, huge volume, and they can be heard up to 2 kilometres away. They're very, very loud. So they're all using their different tactics depending on where they are and how they're fitting in.
Is there a dusk chorus as well as a dawn chorus? And it's a lot different. It's not as noisy as the dawn chorus, is it?
It's not. And when I started doing bird talks, so there is a dawn chorus, very much so. When I started doing bird talks, I used to do a few dawn chorus walks. And I try and pitch them as a way of learning the song. But it's very difficult because it's like heading off to the orchestra and listening to a full-blown orchestra doing some wonderful opera and saying, now we're going to learn what the trumpet does. You won't be able to pick it out. It can be difficult to pick out with such a clamour. So now if I'm doing bird song talks and walks, I tend to do them in the evening time when there's only a few birds. And as it gets later and later, those birds with those big eyes will be the last ones left singing. So if you go out around your house or your garden tonight around about 9:30, 9:45, when it's nearly dark, you'll most likely still hear a song thrush singing, a robin singing, and you might hear a blackbird still singing as well. Okay. So the dusk chorus, when they've done their feeding, they're happy with their lot. They'll do a little bit more of reaffirming their territory and their bonds in the evening time.
Have you heard of a bird called the Heatherbleat? Someone says in summer people hear what sounds like a lamb bleating at night, but it's actually a bird called the Heatherbleat.
Yeah, the Heatherbleat, I think now, and I stand corrected on this, but I think it's a nickname for the snipe. And the snipe has a very unusual call. The snipe, they call it drumming. What the snipe does is it has 2 funny little feathers. If you look at a picture of a snipe on the internet, you'll see 2 little feathers sticking out either side of its tail. And they fly high up into the air. And then as they fly down, those little tail feathers, they vibrate and they give this funny kind of drumming sound. And that might be the Heatherbleat. We talked about the whimbrel last week as well, and it has a kind of highish sound that is probably a bit more like a sheep sound, really, or a sheep's call. But they're calling at night, but that's slightly different. They're on their way heading north, so that's a migratory call. They're connecting with each other, they're chatting to each other. Whereas the snipe and its amazing drumming sound, and again you'll hear that in places where the habitat is untouched, so up the top of Fanet, out along parts of Gweedore, you'll hear them on the islands, of course. And they're amazing night sound, really. But a lot of those sounds, sadly, along with the corncrake and the lapwing and some of those others, that would have filled all of Ireland 50 years ago at this time of year, they're gone now. So there's only a few places, and we're lucky here in the northwest. We still have a lot of rich biodiversity, so we still have a lot of those sounds.
Great. You mentioned the cuckoo there and how it sings at different times today or all through the day. Someone is texting in to say, I heard the cuckoo at about 12:30 the other night.
Cuckoo as well. So the thing is, when you're trying to figure out who is singing and what they're doing, so if you've recognised the sound, well then why is the cuckoo singing at that stage? And they're trying to attract the females that are coming in, and again they're coming in at night time. So the cuckoos, especially when there's a nice big moon, and the moon's very bright at the moment these nights, they can sing all night long. And they're trying to tell the females that they're here, they're about, and they've been out busy spotting meadow pipits' nests to raid and lay their eggs in, and they're ready to breed.
Speaking of raiding, someone says, we watched starlings building in a tree outside our window and then carrying food. Then a magpie came out, and now the birds have to start again. Cruel.
It is cruel, and nature can be terribly cruel in so many ways. The starlings, though, I think are fantastic birds. Some people get annoyed at them because they can be quite noisy, and they'll come into the shed, they'll go onto the eaves of the houses and the rest of it. But you've got to remember the starling numbers are a fraction of what they were 50 years ago. So I really think it's all just trying to get our head around what is there and how lucky we are to have these things, because if the starling numbers keep going the way they are, our children and certainly our grandchildren, they won't know what a starling is. They'll never get to hear them. And starlings impersonate other birds. So if you are lucky enough to have starlings around, listen out for their song and see if you can spot one. And it's a lovely thing to do. It's a lovely excuse to sit down and do very little. Sit down in your garden, spot the starling where you think the starling is nesting, and just listen out for them. I heard one a few days ago in my own garden making the sound of a curlew, and it was a very good impression of a curlew. I knew there was no curlew about, and I could see the starling calling out. They also call out buzzard sounds around here because we get a lot of buzzards and they're very vocal. So they're amazing impersonators of different sounds. But yeah, the magpie is tough. And it does seem kind of cruel to us. They will predate the birds aright, but it's early enough in the year. The starlings will go at it again, and maybe they'll be able to hide their nest a little bit better. I remember my brother recounting a story to me in Dublin, watching a hooded crow pull apart a magpie's nest. So the same thing happens to them, and the hooded crow with its big bill was challenging the magpie, clacking its big bill, threatening the magpies, keeping them away. And the magpies make a big dome of a nest which sticks over the top, and it slowly but surely dismantled the whole thing and had its feast. It seems very cruel, but it's the way it is.
Well, I hope our starlings find their voice very soon, because we've had a free show for the last number of weeks, actually just outside the kitchen window, and coming into just up under the soffit, there's one of the wee grills missing, and that's where the starlings decided to build their nest. And then you were saying the other day, or the other week, that you just leave them and let them be, and they'll build their nest, and the young will be there, and then after a while they'll disappear. Well, they're really noisy at the moment. I think the young are in the nest. Would I be right in saying that?
They could well be this time of year, and the young, every time they hear mum or dad or something that sounds like mum or dad coming into that nest, they'll call.
Oh, there's a lot of squeaking going on, yeah.
There's a lot of squeaking.
It's not a song, not a near a song, and a lot of squeaking. So
that bit's definitely falls into the call
find
category.
Their voice, the better.
Not the, But when you think of what they're up against, because we all can recognise the picture of the baby bird with its mouth, this kind of bizarrely, disproportionately large-sized mouth when they're babies, open, and quite often those mouths are bright yellow, and that's to tell the birds are very good at sound and very good at colour. It's to tell mum or dad where to put the food, but of course they're competing. And you think of young people now that'll be settling down to lunch soon in their house, and hopefully mum or dad will put out nice equal proportions for them all around the table, and they won't be fighting over one sausage or whatever. Whereas that's for the birds, that's exactly what it is. And those that shout louder get more food, get more attention from mum and dad. But you're doing the right thing, because, as I was saying, starling numbers are really crashing, and it's a wonderful thing that you have starlings there, and you're looking after them and doing the right thing by them, even if the noise can be a bit much very early in the morning. And in a couple of weeks, they'll be fledged, they'll be gone, and they'll be eating up bugs and leather jackets and caterpillars off your vegetables all around your garden, doing your service.
We're definitely going to hang in there then. Someone says, what's the black fly that is about the garden? Sorry, that is about the garden is covered with them.
And these, they can look, we don't notice an awful lot of our insect life. In fact, the vast majority of our insect life we don't notice at all. But these guys, they're very slow, very ponderous. They're called the hawthorn fly. Or some places they're called the St. Mark's Day fly. And St. Mark's Day is, I think it's the 25th of April. So they tend to come out around about the end of April, just when hawthorn is in leaf and it's about to flower. And hawthorn flies, they don't do us any harm, first of all. They can't sting you or bite you or any of that kind of thing. They're clumsy things with their two pairs of very hairy legs. They have 3 pairs of legs like all insects, but their back 2 pairs of legs are big and dangly, and they tend to kind of float there like little drones. But if you walk past, they'll land on you. I think they're very comical little insects. It's like they're suddenly getting tired, and anything that goes by, be it a cow, or if they're blown gently towards a branch, they'll suddenly grab onto that branch, or the shoulder of a jacket or whatever, and stop for a little break before they head off. The bigger ones are the females, the smaller ones are the males, and they are great pollinators. Fruit farmers in particularly like them, apple farmers, pear farmers, that kind of thing. So they will pollinate after the nectar in the flower, which is down the bottom of the flower, of course, so they have to pass the pollen on the way. So they'll pollinate an awful lot of our fruit, our crops, our wildflowers there, and they won't do us any harm. But they can look amazing, a little bit amazing if you haven't seen them before. So
they like to rest a lot, and they land on anything that comes in their way.
They do, and those heavy dangly legs, they're kind of clumsy flyers, you know. And fishermen love them because we get them in big numbers. So fishermen will often make flies that will, for fishing with their little hook, which will try and impersonate the hawthorn fly, because they're so big and clumsy. Quite often they'll land in huge numbers in the rivers and the ponds, and they can be one of the first flies that will make the trout, for instance, come up out of the depths and hunt for them.
Speaking of the hawthorn, it's coming into flower now.
Hawthorn is coming into flower. Hawthorn has a few names. We know it mostly as Hawthorn. It's often called white thorn because of this. In another couple of weeks, I'm looking out my little office window here at home, and there's a big, lovely, big, tall, full hedge of hawthorn stretching out off into the distance, and it's this beautiful, beautiful light green. It's my favourite colour, I must say, this time of year. The light green of the hawthorn, the light green of the beech trees, before those leaves mature and they turn a bit darker in colour. But very soon, all the little white flowers will burst out. And it can look like clotted cream was poured over the top of the hedges if you get good conditions. And I'd say this year, if the weather continues like this, the conditions will be very good for lots of flowers. They're sometimes called the May bush because they flower in May, but their leaves start emerging around about April time.
And it's bad luck to cut one.
They go right back in folklore. Yeah, so they were associated with the fairies an awful lot. So the fairy bush is often a hawthorn bush. Not strictly, not always, but often a hawthorn bush. And you'll still see that around the place. Where there's holy wells, you'll often still see a hawthorn bush that won't be touched.
Untouched.
Or in a lot of farmers' fields, you'll often see one lone old-looking tree, and that can be a hawthorn tree. But they were planted prolifically around Ireland from the 1700s onwards, once the hedgerows, that idea of the hedgerows started to come in, because they're excellent stock-proofing because of their thorns.
And from the hawthorn to the blackthorn, and how both spiky, and are they easily distinguished from each other?
They are, and especially this time of year, there's an easy way to tell them apart. So both of them you'll find in the hedgerows. Hawthorn much more common, but still blackthorn are in hedgerows all around Donegal. And the way to remember it is the blackthorns. You'll see the white flowers with the blackthorns before the leaves come out. So the blackthorn has its flowers first, and its thorns and its branches are a very dark colour. So they're beautiful white flowers, which will be covered in hoverflies and all sorts of other insects. Very important for our insect life, which of course is important for the birds and so on. Once those flowers start to fall off, which is around about now, little, very simple, kind of roundy, slightly longer than wide, but very simple, small, little roundy leaves come out. Leaves that look quite like a daisy's leaf, actually. Whereas the hawthorn, it has its leaves first and its flowers second. And its leaves are like a little mini oak leaf. As my children like to say, its leaves are very bumpy. So they're small again, not much bigger than a €2 coin, but they have that kind of serrated bumpiness to them.
So it's flowers before leaves for blackthorn and leaves before flowers for the hawthorn.
That's it. And the way I remember it is that you'll see the blackthorns easily with those white flowers. So the black and white, you'll see. So the flowers first for blackthorn, whereas leaves first for the hawthorn. Right. There's a famous bush actually in Dublin, or there was a famous bush in Dublin called Beggar's Bush. And if anybody knows Lansdowne Road from soccer games or rugby games, they'll have passed Beggar's Bush. And Beggar's Bush is at Ringsend. And Ringsend in the 1700s, 1800s, that was an important place for passengers landing. There was a long spit of land went out to Ringsend. But the land in between Ringsend and then Ball's Bridge, where the bridge was off into the city centre, was very boggy, where the River Dodder was before it was channelled. So you would have to land there, and then you'd have a kind of a hazardous journey to try and get yourself into the city. And at Ringsend is Beggar's Bush, which is a corner, a junction, and that's where there was a big hawthorn tree, and that's where the poor used to go and try and beg money off the travellers, of the foreign travellers or whatever. And there is it goes right back in folklore for many different reasons.
There is a fruit on the blackthorn tree, but it's a very bitter fruit, the sloe.
Yes, the sloe bush or sloe berry. And so all those little white flowers will all be pollinated into something, of course. So once those insects are pollinated, and the bees and the hoverflies and the rest, they will turn into seeds, which are covered in a very, very dark, a deep, deep blue. If you look closely at them in autumn, they're very beautiful colour. And those sloes, you might have heard of sloe gin. People pop them into their gin, or have heard of people popping them into vodka bottles as well, and leave them for about 6 months. And it gives a kind of sweetness to the drink. But you can also make jams out of them. Jams and preserves, but they are very bitter. You wouldn't eat it up too quickly. And the haws have something similar as well, or the hawthorns have something similar as well. They call it the haws. And there's an old saying, and you'll see it here, when all fruits fail, haws. In other words, when nothing else, when it's been a bad season, when your pears are gone, your apples are gone, well, you can rely on the haws. You can nibble on the haws, which are a kind of deep red colour from the hawthorn bush. And again, people make jellies and preserves and things, and there is records of people crunching up those hawthorns berries and making bread out of them. Now, this would be poorer people in desperate times, but they have been used as a source of nutrition.
The haws and the sloes might be better, but the trees themselves, the birds love them. I don't know about the fruit, but they love them for, I suppose, the protection, in amongst all the thorns.
Protection amongst the thorns, yeah. So very much so. So they grow very dense, and being a hedgerow tree, they're not terribly big. Or they won't grow into anything terribly big. But if they're cut every few years, preferably the ideal thing is to let your hedges grow as tall as they can, and they won't grow terribly tall with those kind of trees in them. And then just try and cut them every 3 to 4 years. And they'll give great shelter for your animals. They'll help with drainage. A good, solid, healthy hedge around an acre of a field or so, about half of the water will either drain down through the roots of the hedge or be sucked up by all of that hedgerow. Whereas you get rid of that and replace it with a fence, you've lost all the nature, of course. You've lost the nature corridor, which connects up patches of habitats and patches of land. And you've lost an awful lot of that drainage. But the birds love it, and so many other insects as well. So the squirrels or the foxes and badgers and things like that will use it as little hiding places, ways to kind of scoot along and get from one place to another without having to expose themselves.
And finally, Angus, and briefly, what about the moorhen? Someone's asking, says about the moorhen, are they extinct?
No, not at all. A great place to see moorhens, and one of the things I'm really looking forward to do when we're allowed travel larger distance. I know that's probably a couple of months away yet, but one of the places I'll be going to will be Inch Wildfowl Reserve. And when you land at the car park in Inch Wildfowl Reserve, people sometimes tend to quickly start walking off to try and find birds or find a hide. But if you, at the car park, the little bridge that you cross over just before the main car park there, if you look out into the channels, you'll often find and you'll often hear the moorhens. If you sneak up on those channels, you'll suddenly see them belt off. But if we keep draining our wet habitats, if we keep digging out our ditches and our rivers and our streams, dredging them kind of crudely in a way to try and help flood relief, we're going to destroy an awful lot of those kind of habitats. So it's one of the things we need to balance. Well, obviously we need our flood control, but we need to do it in a way that's going to look after nature, and then nature will help us with the flood control and the rest of it. Okay. Along with that, actually, it just reminds me, if I could mention, Water and Communities Office. Speaking of water and moorhen type habitat, the Water and Communities Office, waterandcommunities.ie, they have a wonderful competition going on at the moment called Stories from the Waterside. It's a writing competition. And they want people to write an original story, something to do with the water, 600 words or less, can be as simple as possible. You'll find the details on waterandcommunities.ie. And there's 10 prizes of €300 each to be won. Plus, it would just be a lovely thing because we've so much folklore connected to our waterways and connected to our waters, our rivers, our lakes and our seas.
Brilliant. Okay, there we leave it. And chat to you next week, Angus. Thanks. That's
great stuff. Thanks, John.